Hello everyone and welcome to the K2 Web Forum. We're so excited for this web forum that we have today and have a special guest. First of all, my name is Boyd Stewart. I'm the VP of Payer-Provider Collaboration, and I'm joined here today with Aureen Wilford, who is Insights Director also over Payer-Provider. How are you doing today, Aureen?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Well, before we introduce our special guest, we have a couple things to announce. First of all, we have saved the date for May 13th through the 15th of 2024 for our upcoming K2 Payer-Provider Summit. It'll be here in Salt Lake City. For more information, please reach out to class, myself or Aureen or anyone that you know from class. Secondly, we're ongoing right now validating Points of Light for 2024. Now, just to remind you, Points of Light are case studies where both a health plan and a healthcare provider will be validated success that both of them are having simultaneously as they work together. More often than not, there's a third-party vendor partner in there working with them. And a lot of our submissions come from those vendors. So please get your submissions in. If you're not sure if what you're doing qualifies for a Point of Light, reach out to us and we'd happily walk you through that. Or if you feel like you're not far enough along, I think you'd be surprised that all of these are a journey. And we want to even capture it early on and capture some of the successes you're having. So with that, I'd like to introduce our special guest today. Jamie Davis is a dear friend, and she's also the VP of Revenue Cycle at SSM Healthcare in St. Louis. I've known Jamie for several years, and I really appreciate the passion that she has for improving and increasing the efficiency between payers and providers at their intersection. So welcome to the call, Jamie.
Hi, Boyd. Hi, Aureen. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Well, we'll just kick off just right now. We're just going to start questions, throwing them at you. But as we look at the positive side of this, as you've been working, on the revenue cycle side on the providers with the providers, where have you seen the most progress in the last couple of years with the health plans?
I think we're actually getting traction here in the last couple of years, more so than we have probably in the last 10, where we're seeing some movement towards really bringing that closing the gap between the payer and the provider, especially in the adjudication space. We're seeing things like payers setting up APIs to direct connect to the provider for things like authorization, eligibility real time, so you aren't having to leverage a vendor to get that response back. Also, some payers are having API marketplaces that house things like patient clinical information share. So a lot of positive movement there, leveraging the API technology. Other things that have been around for a little bit but are picking up steam are things like Gold Card. I mean, we're seeing changes in authorization requirements a lot just recently here to reduce that administrative burden in providing that care. So that has been picking up a little bit of steam there. A lot of technologies are showing up in interesting ways with bridging that gap between the payer and the provider as well to make it a more seamless engagement, if you will. So that's really a few of the things that we've seen in the past couple of years pick up in traction.
I'd love to double click on a couple of things there. First of all, you mentioned some technologies popping up. Who comes to mind as leading out on that as far as tying these things together?
Well, that's the fun part, right? I think everybody is dipping their toe in, but saying their entire body's in the pool. So I don't have any, forefront or leaders that I would call out specifically. But what we are seeing in technologies, if you think about the Epic Payer platform, there's a lot of partnership outside of Epic that is making that engagement more meaningful. So third-party data share companies. I know Moxie is one that's being used with the Epic Payer platform. So we're seeing that market grow pretty significantly. And again, when we think about the Epic Payer platform, it's really similar to some of the API activity that we're seeing today with a more direct connect.
Do you see any hesitation from either side, payers or provider, from the provider side within your organization or from health plans to move down the API path or really adopt some of these technologies?
I don't know that it's hesitation as it is more so capability. So if you think about it today, a lot of organizations are still really struggling with regards to profitability and margins and being able to invest in those areas. And oftentimes when you have limitation in investment, things that are a lot more future facing and aren't as quick benefit driving are usually put a little bit lower down on the priority.
Okay. there's been times over the last several years, and maybe not as frequently today. I don't hear this come up, but certainly it was very loud historically. Whereas I talk to health systems, they say, as we open up, as we get APIs and get that bidirectional data flowing, are we at risk of affecting our contracts? Are we at risk of increasing our denials? Are we putting things at risk by opening up, the data for all to see, so to speak?
It depends on who you ask and what day it is as to where folks fall in that arena. I am of the mindset that if we agree to data share, we also agree to how we react to that data and how we leverage that data. And I think a lot of times that's where providers may not be as super engaged. They're like, yeah, you can come get information out of my system, but then don't set those parameters around, well, what can you do with it and how can we using it in a meaningful way? The other thing that makes that challenging is the reasons why we want to share data are so vastly different. And we are incentivized in two different directions between the payer and the provider, that is really what kind of creates those lag times in making that meaningful information share. And that's why I think it's just been coming out limited incrementally, things like eligibility, things like prior auth, because those are fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
Jamie, I wanted to ask you further questions on gold carding. Is there any difference between how payers deploy the use of the gold card in terms of scalability and sustainability?
What I've seen out in the industry is a couple of different things. They can either base it on, here's your provider activity as it relates to authorization and providing medically necessary services as we, the payer, have defined it. If you play by those rules, we'll allow you to provide services. But similar to the information share, it's very limited. They're not saying, well, all these surgeries, we're going to give you a pass. No, it's more like, oh, you have an in-office procedure. It's very straightforward. There's not a lot of subjectivity to its medical necessity. And so gold cards are great for like that low reimbursement, high volume activity, but we're not seeing that move out into the more complex space.
Interesting. So is there any risk to the health system in terms of engaging in this gold card program?
I don't think there's risk in engaging in the gold card. I think that the benefit has limitations to it. But it really does help the provider in reducing that administrative burden, because now I don't have to call for every single MRI or every single suture that I do in office.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a health plan and a provider. We were having lunch together, and this is a health plan and a provider that work together, right? They're in the same market and doing work together. And it was interesting. This provider came very excited because they had 3 years of data that said, hey, for this prior auth, we have data for the last 3 years that every time we submit, they approve it. Now, there's a lot of back and forth, and it takes a while to get to that end result, but they pay it. So they said, I have all this data. They're just going to say, we're going to get rid of that prior auth. But the response to the health plan was, you know what, when we've noticed in our data, when we remove a prior auth, utilization goes through the roof. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's not about, to your point about getting rid of the prior auths, but is there a benefit to automating them through a payer platform or some of these other ventures?
Absolutely. And Boyd, I hope you weren't sitting in the middle of that conversation, because I'm sure you kind of looked like that a little bit. Yeah, and that's what we have seen a lot of times when we try to come to an agreement on what can we not have this heavy administration around, right? I do think when I think about how they are, and both points are valid, by the way.
Absolutely.
Both arguments are valid, right? And so when we stop, and what I mentioned earlier was like, we're incentivized in two opposite directions, but they actually land in the same place. So they are trying to reduce their cost to deliver coverage, and we're trying to reduce our cost to deliver care, which ultimately drops into that larger bucket of the cost to deliver care across the nation on both sides of the fence. And so we need to stop looking within our own buckets and look into that larger one. And that will find a happy medium between that conversation, right? Like in any strategic discussion, there's always a giveaway, right? There's always a giveaway. And we have to start getting over ourselves, both on the provider and the payer side, and go, we have to do a giveaway for the greater good. But there are structures there that you can actually financially profit from doing that greater good. But they're very isolated in that thinking, particularly on the payer side.
No, that's helpful. You know, one of the things that we're doing these forums for, the main focus is really to push the vendor partners. I mean, you mentioned technology opportunities that sit in the market. To really push them in their development and their roadmap and the things that they're investing in research and development. Are there current challenges you have where you just don't see a solution on the market, or you're saying, hey, here's a real great opportunity for someone to come in and really help healthcare?
You know, I think, so a couple of things. We were going to touch on automation a bit, right? So AI, in the news recently, and I'm not going to call any specific payers out, there was a payer that was leveraging AI and it was resulting in erroneous denials, right? And now the providers are like, wait a minute. And providers are really split on the utilization of AI because of the risk that's associated to it, right? And that payer activity is a perfect example. But I think it's because we're not really great at managing AI and having safety nets around AI. And so when I think about what could be in the market to help this, if we want to automate things between the two of us, right, and make it seamless and simple, there needs to be some sort of defense mechanism that's interjecting and monitoring this AI and says, hey, wait a minute, this is anomalous, and catching it ahead of time. And so it's almost like an AI manager, if you will. So I haven't seen a lot of that in the market today. And it's almost like the AI police, right? Someone needs to build technology for AI police, because when you think about it, providers, we're not technology companies, right? And neither are payers. A lot of them have heavy technology footprints. And so having someone help us navigate through that, I think, is really important. One of the biggest barriers that I see with regards to payer and provider collaboration is the fact that we do not share data well. So Jamie Davis, as an insured member, and my address and my phone number lives over here in this distinct and unique location. And then Jamie Davis, as the patient, a complete duplication of that information, lives separately. And all the activity that happens to me as a patient and as a member is all in duplicate systems that are separate and distinct from one another. So when you think about large health systems that own their own health plan, they still live in two very separate and distinct locations. Now, granted, there's tons of regulatory oversight and governance that tell us how we can share our information with our health plan and vice versa, because you don't want to game the system. But we've been really slow in healthcare to adopt technologies like blockchain or key management with regards to shared data, because in theory, everything that's happening to me as an individual and my demographics can be housed in one centralized location securely and accessed within PHI, PII, PCI rules and regulations by multiple folks. And so someone needs to break that mold within our industry and go, I have the solution that meets the payer need, that meets the provider need, that has security and data integrity, because then we can start sharing technology and reducing redundant technologies. So for example, I have edit rules that the payer has told me, when you bill me for these things, you need to do all this editing and these modifiers and these codes and all that. Well, I get that information from the payer. The payer has a system that houses all that logic. They send me that logic separate and distinct from that system, and I pay somebody as a provider to rebuild that very thing, even when it's my own health plan. And the reason why we do that is because that's the way that we have determined that we can share data. But if we have that jointly shared data, if the activity that's happening into the medical record is dumping into that shared data, and the activity that's happening in my utilization on the other side, now we don't have to have that redundancy. And then we're really, really moving towards a pop health value-based care sort of delivery service. And that's where we need to get to. Everyone keeps talking about the cost to reduce care, and I don't have all the answers either, but I know where we can save some money. And I think that is one of the needs. When I think about the technology that's out there today, I think automation is great, and we need to continue to adopt that in a smart and strategic way. but it really is that data share. It really, really is.
I want to ask a few questions on that whole AI thing, because I think from just what you say, there's definitely gaps in terms of governance over the AI, even, whatever AI you are using currently in your health system. And maybe there's a need for, more policies and regulations, guardrails around the use of the AI. So I wanted to ask you, are there any areas where you feel that AI is being used successfully at the moment? And is there a place where you and the payer can use it interchangeably to benefit you both?
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something really important. So I think we all have heard of ChatGPT, right? And OpenAI is the company that has built and deployed ChatGPT. He went to the government and said, I'm the guy that created this and we need governance. So I take that as a really good indicator. Like, if it's the thing you built and you're asking for governance, I'm going to follow suit. Kind of like if the flight attendant is stressed out, I'm going to be stressed out.
Right.
So we do need to create some sort of governance within AI across the board, not just within our industry. And that kind of goes back to that conversation I had about like an AI policing, if you will, or oversight. But where I see AI working well is really in predictive modeling. So if you think about, there's technologies out there today that'll tell you based upon machine learning, historical algorithm-driven actions that, hey, Jamie, when you do these things, this is going to deny, and tells me that I can stop and do something differently. And on the flip side, payers have that as well. Like, every time we see this, 9 times out of 10, we need to deny this based upon this information and send that back out. So I think predictive modeling, it's working well. I think RPA has been heavily adopted over the last 5 years. And again, that's not really AI based. That's just the hands, if you will, right? But I think that areas that we're going to start seeing expansion in AI is really in claims management and potentially CDI, clinical decision making, because it's all if thens, right? If thens, and then being able to predict that outcome and intervene to improve that outcome. But again, we are slow to adopt there because we are not technology driven providers, right? We leverage technology, but we don't create them. And we do need to get a little more advanced and robust in our governance of it.
Yeah, as you describe some of these areas, it reminds me, so right now CLAS is measuring a couple areas. We measure revenue integrity as an area that the providers use to capture underpayments or things that weren't paid according to contract, things like that. And then we actually measure a new segment here for us at CLAS. It's not a new segment in the industry, but for the payers, payment integrity. It's looking for the overpayments, right? And if there's a way that a single vendor could do that and just say, hey, at the end of the day, let's just get it right. If it should have been paid, it should be paid. If it shouldn't, it shouldn't. But I'm just wondering, you talked about what healthcare could be and talked about kind of that transition to value. As a patient, I get really excited because it describes the kind of healthcare I think we all want for ourselves and our families. What's the biggest barrier today, do you think, as far as preventing us from transitioning to value?
The incentive. Payers and providers, until we are incentivized financially or regulatory, that's a huge barrier. And then that data share. I think those two are the most critical components to be able to fully transition away from this fee-for-service to outcome-based reimbursement.
So, yeah, and I'm just trying to think. So you've described a couple first steps. Are there any other first steps that we need to take? I'm trying to think outside of a government entity, kind of, changing incentives for healthcare. I mean, do you see organizations that are leading out on this?
I know organizations that are trying to lead on that, and those are those larger health systems with their own health plan, because it's just, they're paying a lot of money to move dollars around on a GL. And right. They're recognizing that is a huge opportunity. So in my prior position, our health plan partners were wholly bought in on reducing the payer provider administrative burden together. And so I think that's where we're going to see it take off. And then what that does is that creates a competitive edge for that health system in comparison to other health systems for their market, because now they can deliver a much more improved concierge-like experience with their members at a lower cost and a higher return, because they've reduced a lot of that administrative chaff that eats up a lot of those dollars.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful. It's interesting is, obviously Medicare Advantage has taken big steps to be a kind of a value-based care plan. And unfortunately as a lot of providers look at that and the results they've seen in their own organization, it's kind of slowed for them their desire to move to value. And I think you're right, because they put a lot of rules in place, but what didn't come with that was the data sharing, was the change in incentives and a lot of those other things. And so we were looking at those results with the fee-for-service mindset, and it is different.
Well, if you think about the analytic burden that comes along with value-based care, it's pretty heavy, right? Because we need to be able to analytically prove that clinical outcome with all those clinical indicators. And right now, a lot of organizations that are really focused on those VBC and pop health initiatives spend a lot of time chasing data gaps more so than care gaps. So again, it goes back to that data share for sure.
Okay. Well, this has been really, really helpful. Any other questions, Oreen?
No, I think we've covered everything. That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie. And we'll follow up if there's questions that come from the group. We will reach out and ping you with those as appropriate. And we just can't thank you enough. And again, remind everyone to submit their points of light. If your organization has one that you'd like to explore, we'd love to explore that with you, as well as coming up, we have the K2 Summit in Salt Lake City, May 13th through the 15th of next year. So again, thank you so much for our guest, Jamie Davis. Good luck to you, and have a great rest of your fall.
Thanks to you both, and I will see you in May.
Thanks.